We've all heard the saying that the world is a small place. I personally think that it's a very big one. So big that most of us don't get to explore a lot of it growing up or throughout the rest of our lives. The author that I'm about to sit down with today and has written 2 books, both The Whinging Pome, one called To the Point and the other On the Road Again. The series of books are interesting, they're very intriguing as the author himself. Traveling from Sri Lanka to India to Azerbaijan to Namibia to Uruguay, exploring different angles and writing it as it is, keeping it real with copious amounts of humor. We have today on Interviews and Reviews with Vanessa Mendis, Paul Topic. Hi Paul.
Hi.
It's lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I've just been through your couple of books and they're really, really interesting. But before we get into that, I'd like to know a little bit more about yourself.
Well, how long have you got? I mean, I was born in Africa. I travelled with my parents who were missionaries. So I from a very young age, it was, pack your bags, we're moving on. And that happened to me throughout Central Africa and then out to South Africa. Lived in England for a while. I've lived in America. I've had a home in India. Still actually have a home. And I came to Sri Lanka about 22 years ago, and this is where I continue to stay. This is my home now. When people say, where are you from? I say Sri Lanka. And they say, well, you're a burger. And I said, no, it's just that I live in Sri Lanka. I've had the travel bug my parents gave it me, and the writing came about 20 odd years ago when I started to write. And I just enjoy operating from here. I do still travel a lot. I mean, pre-COVID, I would probably travel 6 months a year. But this would always be home.
Great. How long have you been writing for?
Well, I suppose, as I said, probably about 20 years. I had a long spell with LT magazine where I was in their monthly publication as the Whinging Pome, which wasn't just travel. I talked about wine. I talked about things that I felt were wrong. I talked about elephants. In fact, I've recently done another elephant story. I mean, I write about 3 or 4 stories a week. That I only write short stories, and I get passionate about a lot of things, and I'm a tapophile, which means I travel around the world looking at what I consider to be sort of dark history, from Auschwitz. There's probably one extreme example, but even here in Sri Lanka, I've been known to be walking around graveyards and getting history about people and why they're buried there, etc. So the wife doesn't quite like it, and we have a deal that for every hour she spends in the cemetery, I have to spend 2 weeks in the shop.
Well, that's a good bargain. Tapophile, is it?
Yeah, tapophile.
Tapophile, okay. So you actually just go to graveyards, and then if you see something that's interesting, you track that person.
Yeah, I mean, some of them you go because you know who's there.
Right.
And some of them you go, there's a baronet that's buried in a cemetery in Trincomalee, and I wanted to find out why would a baronet be there, and ultimately this young man couldn't stand living with his father, who was the baron, and he left in a ship. Unfortunately, it was a ship that got sunk here in the Second World War, and he died. So it was just a fascinating story about why would this young man forge his age and come on a ship to Sri Lanka. So that was the story.
Okay, great. Can you also take us a little bit about through the concept of the Whinging Pome, both the books, that is, how it came to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you travel and you've got the opportunity, as I've had, to meet people, different groups of people, different nationalities, and you see how people respond. And I'm someone who wants to be in the thick of it. I'm not someone who stands outside and looks in. I tend to want to be in the middle of it all, and that poses and creates situations which, in a lot of cases, are just funny to me. I explained about what I thought was a zebra crossing the road in Mumbai, and it turned out to be, a horse with painted stripes. So, these things just seem to be around me, and I just thought, well, when I tell the story, people find it very funny. The difficulty is when you write it, can you be as funny as you are? I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I think I can hold my own in terms of telling stories, and putting it into writing was a challenge, because I didn't particularly think I was going to be this sort of someone who was publishing books. I just started to write. So just the experiences have just sort of pushed me towards saying, well, put it down. You know how you meet people and you say, you should write a book. And I people say, you should write a book. Now, how many of those people actually do write a book? And so I did the first one, and the second one is here, and the third one is in draft form. Every time I'm sitting in front of my computer, my wife will say, "Is that Whinging Pome again?"
I know the meaning of it, but the Whinging Pome, sometimes our viewers might not know. Do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, I mean, whinging can be anything from moaning, can be talking about in an aggressive, loud manner. So whinging is different things to different people. But Pom is very specific, and that's a prisoner of Mother England. And it basically means that it comes from when we used to send our convicts. I mean, if you pinched a chicken, stole a chicken in London, 400 years ago, they'd ship you off somewhere around the world to start a colony, a British colony. So they shipped a lot of people to Australia, and those people, once they did their service, remained there and created the colony. So they were basically prisoners at one stage of Mother England. And these people say, I'm a Pom, I'm a prisoner of Mother England. And you go, well, is that positive or negative? And the reality is that, for me, when I say to people I'm a Pom, I talk about England, and people say, well, why don't you go back? I don't want to live in England. All these people who went to Australia and are, now their descendants are there, they're not all hankering to go back to England. I mean, there are 50 people a day leave England to go to Australia and, to live. So it's really a term that sort of says, I'm a Pom. I know, in a lot of ways, I have a lot of Pom characteristics. So, prisoner of Mother England. And it's what my wife calls me, the Whinging Pom.
Okay. All right. Paul, for someone who's travelled as extensively as you have, especially when your writing is also inspired by what you see and experience during your travels, I feel like the creative process can have a lot of layers to it. How do you pick and choose the stories that you put on pen and paper? What makes you pick them up?
I mean, I tend to write, like, at the end of the day, I'll be writing about what happened that day, and some of it is okay, but it isn't that exciting. And then in other days, I've got things that happen or places that I go to that I think, well, that's very different. Why have I ended up here? Or I've met somebody. So I'm constantly writing, and in fact, I try and then merge what I consider to be some of my experiences with some history, because I love history. So there's always something about the place and the history of the place. And then there's always, for me, some humour. That's rather because, my wife's quite a character, and we always end up in situations, and in those situations normally comes the humour. And so I really want, I don't really want, I mean, there are some exceptions, but I really, in the short stories, I really want to give people a flavour of the place, what was different. I mean, when I went, I go to a city and my wife will go shopping. So she shops, and I walk the city if I can, I walk areas of the city. And I'll be fascinated by things that some people will just walk past and say. So, that I'm in the south of France, and I walk past a monument, and to me, what is that monument? It's the monument of the first Americans who actually came in on the landings in the south of France. And then I looked at the names, and then I did a little bit of work, and I thought, well, I find that fascinating. How many Americans came, and how many Americans died in France? And I got fascinated about the resistance movement, and you just wouldn't comprehend how many people were disappeared, and just the number of people and their families, during the Second World War in France. So it just became something that I got passionate about. So I delved into it, and then I link it when I'm travelling, and then I speak to everybody. My wife says, if a dog passes, I'll even speak to a dog. It's just that's the way it is.
Yeah. So your wife makes an appearance in all the books, I'm guessing.
She's in all of the books. She's more in the second book,
okay.
And I call her Jezebel. My lawyer basically said to me, and my lawyer was involved in the first book, said, if you're going to talk about your wives, I've had a few wives, but if you're going to talk about your wives, just make sure they don't sue you. So I actually changed all their names, and Sharani, who's my wife, actually is a Jezebel. I mean, she's a character who stands her ground and doesn't suffer fools very long.
And she accompanies you on all of your travels?
Yes, I have to say, we've been lucky enough that we've been together just, what would you say, about 9 years, so married 9 years. But in most circumstances, you can't travel with your partner. And that's what happened to me, in all the years before. My partner would be sitting in England, and I'd be travelling around the world. And it's always very difficult when you come back and you tell all these stories. And they said, yeah, but it isn't like that in Sevenoaks. So, I had the fortune, that my wife can travel with me in the last 5-6 years. We've been, and we like going to a long way without necessarily getting into the details. So we went to Brazil. We only booked a ticket in, a ticket out, 1 month, and we only booked 1 night in a hotel. Now I was speaking at a conference in Brazil, so that helped, but we had no plan. And I don't want anyone to sit in Sri Lanka and tell me what my plan should be for Brazil. I went, and my wife then went and spoke to various people about what would you do in Brazil. And we basically said, and Brazil has a massive country, a lot of flying, and we just worked out, from being there and talking to people about what we should do. So in a lot of cases, for us, people who meticulously plan, when I go to Barcelona, these are the 5 things I should do. The first thing you should do when you go to Barcelona is sit in a square and just get a feel of the place before you get Gaudi'd out, which is what happens. You end up getting Gaudi this, Gaudi that, Gaudi the other. You tick the box and you go and say, well, I've done it. My issue is you've never done it anyway. There isn't a city where I would say I wouldn't go back to. It's just that I've travelled to over 100 countries. But if you said to me about Argentina, you think of the size of Argentina. Even though I spent a month there, it's worth going back to see more.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you how many countries you've been to. You said roughly over 100 countries.
Yeah. When you go to somewhere for a weekend, you tick the box and say that's a country that I visited. And I suppose you can do, but for us, what we've learned is 3 months in New York. We didn't go out of New York. We didn't. So someone said, why would you come to New York to spend 3 months in New York? And I just said, because first of all, I want to visit every Irish pub. I have a saying, never pass an Irish pub, always go in. So I have the Whinging Pome random rules, and there are probably about 350 of them, and they come out of situations. So, but one of them is never pass an Irish pub. If you go in, you're going to meet somebody, and if you're on your own somewhere in the world and you find this Irish pub, you'll find 50 people at the bar who will talk to you. When we went to New York, there was just, between the Irish, pubs, the history, the culture, I didn't want to travel anywhere else.
Okay, so the next book is already in the works, you said, is it?
Yes, it is. It's basically my experiences in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And I have published Sri Lanka in both of those books. And it's not meant to be sort of, I picked this up because this is the guide to Sri Lanka. But if I give you an example of I had someone who said to me, I must thank you for my honeymoon. And I said, well, I haven't met you, but I'm very happy you're thanking me. And she said, yeah, but you wrote about a country, and you wrote about it in such a way, and my husband said, that is where we're going for the honeymoon. And so in Sri Lanka, it's a little bit like, you can travel between 2 towns here on the coast, but do you actually go down every single cul-de-sac and look at what is on, and you don't. You may go, from Dickwella to Tangor and actually say, well, I've done Tangor. I actually want to be going down the cul-de-sac. I want to go where someone says to me, you can't get a 4-wheel drive vehicle down there. Which happened to me, when we were at LA, someone said, well, if you want to go and see the bridge, you've got to get the tuk-tuk. I said, I'm taking my own vehicle, I want to do it my way. And so, Sri Lanka has so much to offer. And every time you think, well, I can tick the box, you can't. And I've been back to most of the towns. I'm an avid traveller here, and in the last 2.5 years, like a lot of us, where else can we travel?
Yeah, that is true. So, would you say that you can pick a favourite place out of the destinations you've been to? It must be a tough call.
Yeah, that's pretty tricky. I would have to, because I have such fond memories, and I do go back here. I'm in a group I call the African group. None of us are African. Even though I was born there, I consider myself to be African. But that African group, sort of religiously at one point, went every year to Africa and different places. And I always loved going back to Livingston, which is on the Zambezi, which is where I was a kid. And to go over the Victoria Falls on a microlight, and the microlight is wobbling like this, and I said to the pilot, do you do this often? He said, well, I used to work for the Air Force, but we don't have any aeroplanes left. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a worry. But I could go back to that area, the Victoria Falls and the Zambezi, on a regular basis if I could.
Okay, great. And I've also realized something while having this conversation with you. You say it as it is, but there's also a lot of humor. And just going through your book, I've noticed that it's exactly the writing style as well. There's generous amounts of humor in this. But I think you're also keeping it really real and really honest. Is it because you try to just be yourself? You're trying to bring out your personality, or is it just naturally how you feel when you write things? Is there anything you share?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I would much prefer. I mean, my father's a preacher. He didn't give me his religion, but he gave me the ability to talk. So I think I probably could tell the stories better standing and talking to people. Writing them is the difficult bit for me. It's been difficult. And so the whole idea about what is in there and is it me? It is, but I don't think it's as much me as I'd like it to be, or this whinging pom, which is me. And I've done the best I can, but I constantly look at it and say, but if I was telling that story, I'd everyone laughing, but maybe they read one line and think, well, that's funny, okay, fine.
Okay, all right. So I would say that you're a seasoned writer and you know what to say in your books and how you present it. Is there anything that you can sort of share in terms of maybe even advice or words to the wise for the writers out there?
Right. I make copious notes. I mean, I always walk around with a notebook. I write because I don't necessarily have the best of memories. I can think about places and incidents, but actually you miss the gems. So one of the things I do is I write every day. I write about what I've got to achieve that day, and that's from my business background. I start the list of to-dos, and then the list of things that I've done, or the interesting things that I mean, this morning, as an example, I got given a form in my new apartment block that I'm in that I have to fill in, and it says I have to give a police report on my maid. And I said to this guy, well, you're ridiculous, My maid has been with me for over 10 years. You haven't asked for a police report from me, but you want it from my maid. And I walked off in my normal British style. I actually went back and apologised, and I said, listen, I know you didn't design this form, you're just the guy on the reception. I'm sorry that I actually was a bit harsh. I could tell that story and it'd be quite visual, but if I wrote it, it might not actually be as exciting. That the fact that I did a very sort of whinging pom with the receptionist.
Okay, all right. Paul, I think could you also let our viewers know where they can purchase both these books?
Jam Fruit Publications is obviously the first place you should go to. I'm in Barefoot. I'm in most bookshops, and I'm online as well. I do a massive amount of blogging. I have a Whinging Pome Facebook site. So I've got people who follow me on Whinging Pome on my Facebook site. I don't think some of them have read the book. They just and the short stories are always on there. So like every week, 3 or 4, and sometimes there's a photograph of maybe 4 lines. So you don't need to be an avid reader of the Whinging Pome to keep up with where I am and what I'm doing. I've just written about cricket, by the way. I mean, when I was a boy, I used to play French cricket. No one's heard of French cricket, but anyway, you need to read the thing. But I talk about French cricket, and then I talk about the day I came here was when Sri Lanka. The week I came here was when Sri Lanka won the World Cup, and like I was just man. So yesterday I was standing in a queue of 250 people trying to get my tickets for the match on Tuesday, but they sold out. So now I'm looking for tickets. Actually, I've got some, but so what I mean is I love living here. I just and getting to do things here is for me. I came here by tuk-tuk. And so why would you use a tuk-tuk? Or why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Great. So, speaking of you being online, do you have ebook versions of these as well?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We can put those details down in the comments with the video so that you guys can get to the ebook versions if you prefer that. And thank you, Paul, for being here today. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I think I'm going to look forward to your next book because you've certainly brought a lot to the table in terms of culture and adventure and humor. And the Whinging Pome. So thank you for being the Whinging Pome. I think I'm gonna say that.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much. Thank you.